We're here today in the Psychic Matters studio. It's St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone who's listening. I'm so excited because I was contacted during the week by Frances McCarthy, and she said, I've got this incredible idea for a St. Patrick's Day podcast episode. Do you think you might have time to put it together? And of course, I said, absolutely, yes, please. She's here. She's in the studio. She's phoning in all the way from New York City, and she's here to tell us all about Ireland's thin places. Frances McCarthy, welcome back to Psychic Matters.
Thank you, Anne. It's always great to be here, and I'm really thrilled that we're having this, one of my favourite subjects, near and dear to my heart. So I'm delighted that we're squeezing it in for St. Patrick's Day.
I know also that you're talking to us from your New York apartment, which is old and ancient, you told me, and it's got an ancient heating system. So I know there might be a slight hiss in the background. So forgive us for that, listeners. We're doing the best we can. And Karen has got these beautiful kittens. She's got 2 kittens, and they may be making some noise throughout, but we welcome them.
Thank you. Rescue kittens. I just rescued them. So they're just delighted, I think, to have a little home to run around in now.
That's so sweet. How old are they?
One is 4 months and one is 7 months.
Ah, the little things. What are their names, Karen?
Tara and Tua.
Ah, perfect Irish names for St. Patrick's Day.
Yep.
Karen, tell us all about the thin places of Ireland.
Yeah, the thin places in Ireland. I mean, there are thin places all over the world, but in Ireland, we have thin places everywhere. I've often said, you can't sort of go a mile without tripping over one. But basically, the thin places are very ancient places where it is said the veil between the worlds is thin. Now, some of these places have become very famous. So like Newgrange, for instance, which is, 5,000-year-old structure in County Meath. In the Boyne Valley, there are 3 large structures of these. Newgrange is one that is now UNESCO World Heritage Site. But it was built it's pre-Celtic. It was built by the ancient occupants of Ireland. And what it is it's this massive chamber that is dark all year round and lights up the inner chamber. Light flows through the little box over the entrance door only on the winter solstice, and lights up just around the winter solstice and lights up this inner chamber. And then after the solstice is over, it retracts, and then it goes into darkness for the whole rest of the year. So it's an amazing feat of engineering as well, that these ancient people were able to move all of these massive, you want to see there's massive rocks, with all those swirls that we've come to associate with Celtic art, they're all carved in to these rocks. 5,000 year olds, just phenomenal. And the fact that they were able to align the structure with the rising dawn on the solstice that long ago. I mean, this is 1,000 years older than Stonehenge.
Extraordinary. Yes. And those stones, are they as big as Stonehenge?
They're not as big because it's a mound, so it's not the sort of dolmen structure that Stonehenge has. But the entrance stone, these stones aren't even found in this area. So they've somehow managed to transport on logs or boats or somehow these massive, massive boulders that are there. I mean, anybody who'll Google it will see, well, actually we had one for the podcast. That was me standing at the entrance to Newgrange in front of that boulder. Yeah. So that had been sort of incorporated into Celtic mythology in later years afterwards. And so the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Tuatha Dé Danann being the ancient gods of Ireland, this sort of supernatural race, all-powerful race. The Dagda, which was the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, makes reference to Newgrange, because when Dermot, who was his beloved, I think it was his grandson or nephew or godson, was killed in battle, he said he was going to bring his body to Newgrange to put in what he called an aerial life in him, so he could talk to him. So the implication is that you could bring the dead body of Dermot into Newgrange, and then he would be able to communicate with him. So therefore, it becomes the thin place, where
it's a holy place, very, very sacred.
It's assumed that it was originally a burial mound because there are chambers in it, and of course somebody has stolen all of the artifacts, long since stolen all the artifacts that were in those chambers. But it was considered a burial mound, but all of the thin places have that spiritual and sacred sense to them. But
sorry, Karen, to interrupt you. What was the purpose then of it filling with light in the summer solstice or the solstice, summer, winter?
Well, we can't know for sure because obviously there was no writing back then, whatever, to share with us. But it's assumed that the idea is that it is the promise of light on the darkest day of the year, the promise of renewal on the darkest day of the year.
Wow, beautiful.
Beautiful. So there are two other very, very large mounds in the Boyne Valley as well, Knowth and Douth. Douth is kind of my sort of favourite one in that it's closed to the public. Newgrange has been restored, so it gets something like 200,000 visitors a year. But Douth is sort of down a narrow little country road in a field, and apparently the Royal Irish Society back in 100 years ago decided to excavate it and botched it, and so it's not safe. So they can't open it. So what I have found with Douth is that when you find it, you almost need to know the locals to get that. There's a big visitor centre for Newgrange. Douth is sort of the poor cousin down the road. When you get there, because there's no traffic, there's no people, it hasn't been disturbed hardly. When you step into Douth and you sort of look through, they've gated off the entrance, but when you peer into the tunnel, you can you can feel the spirits of Ireland because it's so undisturbed. Beautiful, love it. So you have to kind of climb over a wall to get into it and all the rest of it, But it's so undisturbed that even though it's sort of been sort of semi and badly excavated, that the power, you can feel the power of that place, of that thin place there,
Amazing. Amazing. And so the thin place is the place where two worlds meet. This is what you mean by the thinness?
Yeah, it's the place where they say the veil between worlds is very thin, which is why it's easier. And so for example, Onagat out in Roscommon is considered the origins of Halloween, right? It is supposedly the gates of hell. Now, it actually has a very, very rich mythological history. It was much later that Christian monks decided it was the gates of hell. But it was in a whole big, very sophisticated sort of town structure called Rathcrohan. And what's left of it now is basically this hole in the ground. But it's a cave, it's a subterranean cave. And when you go into it, there is no sensory perception. There is something about this cave where there's no sense of sound or smell. There's just nothing. It's just it's almost like this dead space you go into. So you can understand why myths sort of arose and folklore arose around it. But it is said that particularly at Halloween, that sort of the old gods of Ireland, like the Morrigan and whatnot, will come out of this, and all sorts of the Slua and the Marv and all of these strange creatures can come and steal your children and steal your soul and all these kinds of things. And they emerge from this cave at Halloween in particular. And it's considered a thin place because the other world is able to come in to this world, and then in turn we can go into the cave into the other world. So there's all sorts of great folkloric stories, of course, and superstitions around these places, but they're essentially incredibly powerful places, and they're sort of all over Ireland, like Lough Crew. There's another one, Lough Crew, but there's also, and this is sort of an anecdotal story, there are these dolmens all over the countryside, the old rocks, the sheetrock on the top, and then what's it called, the pie, they look like pie, that sort of thing. The mathematical thing. And so I remember one time being out in the west of Ireland and somebody saying to me, there's a fairy mound nearby. Now the fairy mounds are always thin places, right? Because the fairy mounds are the domain of the fairies. Now the fairies are not cute fairy winged creatures. The fairies have become the Tuatha De Danann, the fairies, or the Sidhe as they're known in Ireland, the Sidhe. So the Tuatha De Danann, with the arrival of Christianity, to reconcile, this is a hotly debated in academic circles, but this is one of the arguments, is that to reconcile the arrival of Christianity and Christian gods with the ancient gods of Ireland, the Tuatha De Danann, which were the ancient gods, the people of the goddess Danu, they kind of gradually became shrunk in size to become the Sidhe, who occupied these fairy mounds. And then a lot of folklore arose out of that. And so those gods still exist as the Sidhe around Ireland, right? And they're taken, you don't mess with them, I have to be honest, So you've probably heard of the Banshee, for example, the woman of the Sidhe, that's what it means. And so there is a supernatural element to this folklore and to these beings. And so they occupy what are called fairy mounds. So the fairy mound is also a gateway between worlds. So all these fairy mounds are the thin places of these gateways as well. And so I grew up in Dublin, And there's a factory, Cadbury chocolate factory were built, and there's a fairy mound in the middle of it because you would never knock them down. You'd have to build around them. And back in the 90s, as late as the 90s in Ireland, there was a fairy mound in the middle of where they were planning to put a motorway over in Clare, I think. And there was petitions, you can't knock down, because all sorts of woes would befall you if you disturbed the fairy mounds, right? So the motorway was eventually rerouted, would you believe, around the fairy mound, because you really don't want to mess with them
That's
at all.
amazing. That is so amazing. And so the Irish people, do they communicate with the fae? Do they communicate with these, the fairies? Do they see them?
Well, the thing about the fairies are, you kind of grow up with it in your culture. Some people say they've seen fairies. I can't say I've ever seen a fairy. I've certainly felt the energy though. And I'll tell you about that in a moment. But there are, for example, when I was a kid, there was this idea that you could hear the banshee. Now, the banshee would wail, right? She wails at night. And she combs her hair with this golden comb. And if you hear the banshee wailing, you never want to look at her, because if she'll fling her comb at you and kill you, right? And so I woke up one time, I must have been about 7, and I woke up and I heard the wailing of the banshee, right? And I was terrified. Oh my God, there's a banshee right outside the window, outside the house. And I went into my father and I said, "Oh my God, Dad, there's a banshee outside, And so my dad got up and he came into my room and he went to pull back the curtain to look out. And I was pleading with him, please don't look out the window. The banshee. I was terrified. The banshee's going to kill my father, And he looks out the window, he says, "Don't see anything," and he goes back to bed, whatever. But it was years later before I learned that the wailing was cats. But this is how folklore arises, right?
This is it. Yes, exactly. And that terror and it spreads throughout people, spreads throughout cultural.
Yeah, there's something in our nature that loves to create these scary stories for ourselves. It's always been there. I mean, we still do it in horror, Stephen King, but there is something inherent in the human nature that we just seem to love to scare each other, have these scary stories for each other,
Talk to us then about the energy that you say you felt the energy. So that's very interesting. What did it feel like? Where were you? What happened?
So, the energy I have felt at Doubt very, very powerfully. You can feel it there. It's very, very still. It's ineffable. It's just, you really need to be there to experience it. But one way, I was over in the West at one point for a week or so one time, and some local guy said to me, "There's a fairy mound up in farmer somebody's field." Now you walk into these fields in Ireland where there's a fairy mound, and the fields are all ploughed around the mound, because it wouldn't do for a farmer to be disturbing them, right, any more than the motorway or a factory. And so this person this local guy said, "Shall we go up?" So I said, "Yeah, let's go up and check it out." So now you're always told as a kid, you never go into a fairy mound. Ever go in to try to get into it, because William Butler Yeats wrote The Stolen Child about how the fairies would come and steal children. That's what this poem The Stolen Child is about. So you were told as children never to go into these places. Of course, again, I learned many years later from why. But on this day, we decided we would go and we would try to find out what's actually in a fairy mound, which is a bit stupid. But anyway, so we get up to the top of this hill and discover there must have been about 20 meters of thicket and bramble and thorns around it, And so it was thick, just this thing. And so we started pushing our way through, and it was so thick we were tearing all our clothes and cutting ourselves up and everything. And we finally pushed our way into the center of this supposed fairy mound that was thick with brambles. And when we got into the middle of it, there was a little small dolmen covered in lichen and stuff right in the middle of it. And so obviously over the years, over the centuries, because this dolmen existed, people left it because it was considered to be a thin place of the fairy folk, right? The thin place where the fairy folk could travel between this world and their own, Tirnanog, their world being Tirnanog, the land of the youth. And so obviously over the centuries, it was never touched. So the brambles were just grew up around it. And so nobody would go into it. So here we are, these two idiots in the middle of it. And we get to this dolmen, and this guy says to me, "So there's supposed to be energy from this. So we threw some pennies in, which you have to do. So anybody listening who wants to go traipsing around any of these thin places, make sure you bring an offering to appease the fairies, appease the she, so they don't come and beset you with woes. So we threw some pennies in under this dolmen, and then we took turns standing on it to see if we could feel the energy, So we're sort of standing there. It's like, yeah, you can kind of feel something. And so anyway, we gave up on eventually, and we fought our way out of the thing. We were all in pieces. I mean, we were torn to pieces by the time but you can understand why they scare children, right? And we got back in the car, and this was years ago, and we had those old brick phones. Remember those old big brick phones? So my phone had been on 1% or something. The battery was all but dead going into it. And when we came out and I got into the car, it was at 20%. So the phone had charged on the dolmen. Isn't that hilarious?
Wow, that's amazing. That's
crazy.
Amazing. Oh my goodness. It sounds like you trying to make your way into Sleeping Beauty's castle with all those thorns trying to get in.
It was ridiculous, but it was really interesting experience because that was something tangible. We could say, "Oh, holy God, look! It really did charge up the phone." So there really was some energy there. Which sort of Tesla's been trying to accomplish spend the last years of his life trying to do that. Yeah. So there's these sort of things, and you go to any of these places, and I know we've talked before about the beehive huts that were in Star Wars. Remember, Luke Skywalker lived in one, on Skellig Michael there down in Kerry. And now, the beehive huts were built by monks. So this is long, long after the Tuatha, long after the gods of Ireland, long after the She. This is the Christian age in Ireland. But you go to those beehive huts and you can feel there's a power there as well. And part of that, I do believe, is because from the decades and centuries of prayer and devotion that the monks pour into these places, can create a thin place. Now, it's different from the thin place in Owen Nagat in a way that's associated with, all sorts of evils of hell will come out and befall you on Halloween. But this is a very sacred space, got this beautiful energy that has created this thin place, this sort of place where there's this very palpable sense of being connected to something greater. And I feel it's because of the prayer and the devotion that has been poured into that place over the years. I mean, you find this a lot in Iona, you find it in many, many monasteries, convents. Those sort of silence and devotion have created this sort of thin place, this sense of heightened connection to the source or to the one, which is beautiful feeling, And they also in Ireland have emerged as healing wells. So, there's the Bridget's Healing Well, the most well-known one is in Kildare, where the St. Bridget's Well, where people will come and they'll put little photographs of their loved ones or offerings or gifts and sit to receive. And these are usually sort of near water. So like the one in Kildare has a little sort of stream in it. But they're kind of dotted around the country. And you can actually go, and that again is a thin place, and you can sit there within that thin place where the boundaries between this world and the next are thin to receive healing. And so the Bridget's Well is Bridget was an ancient god. She was a member of the Tuatha in the ancient goddesses. And then, of course, with the arrival of Christianity, she became Saint Bridget. But it's essentially the same person. That happens the world over. And so, but the Bridget's Well are also thin. The wells are thin places. And they're also, again, they're not portals between worlds, as in you can kind of go run into the next world. But there's certainly places where the boundaries between worlds are very thin. And you can feel that power when you sit with them.
That's amazing. And so all of these different places, all of these thin places, are they all burial places from many, many eons ago, or was there another purpose for them?
No, they're not burial places at all. I mean, it's considered that Newgrange was some sort of burial place, mostly because of the artifacts and stuff that were left around that you sort of see in in Egypt. The way that there's always been this way of leaving. So that's been assumed in Newgrange. But Owen Nagat is a cave of some very intense sensory deprivation, which must have been a very bizarre experience for early folk who wouldn't have understood the science of why that happened. And so out of that grows the myth that this place, there is no sensory perception possible in this place because it's a gateway, because it's a thin place. The streams, the water, I think in many cultures we associate water with healing. So I do feel that's why Bridget's Wells, those thin places have arose out of the sort of healing intention, the healing need. And again, I feel with like places like the beehive huts, in places like in monasteries and different places. I know there's lots of these all over Scotland as well, although I'm not as well versed in Scottish thin places. They come from just this sort of sense of the sacred. So there's quite of many different ways of and functions that these have. But the ones that are emerging from our mythologies are, of course, relate to the Sidhe, the ferrymans, and they're always, don't get the Sidhe, get you. But the Sidhe have also, these days will leave you a penny for your tooth, sort of thing. They've just kind of evolved into that. The thing about it is, within the thin places, you don't have to die to sense or communicate or interact with the other world, the other worlds or the other side at all. So the story of Tir na Nog, Diarmid went off to Tir na Nog, and the god Lu was the god of the light, and he would come out of the sky and he was this great light. And if you went off with Lu, then you would feel like one night, there's lots of stories in Irish mythology about this, one night had passed, but then when you came back, like Cuchulain's mother came back, sort of had a night with Lu. When she came back the next day, sort of 100 years had passed, this sort of thing would happen. Because the Tir na Nog, or the land that the Sidhe came from, was really outside time, So it's just really interesting the way all of this information becomes digested and assimilated, and then myth and folklore arises around it to make it all very interesting for us, right? It's all great fun, a lot of it.
It's fantastic. And on the artwork, you've supplied that beautiful photograph of you standing outside one of these places. And there's a very big rock there. And you mentioned earlier the engraved swirls that are all over it. Do you think what are those? Is that just art? Is that a symbol for something?
No, I'd say it's a symbol, because there are other types of symbols inside Newgrange, inside in Loughcrew. I've got all these photographs from being inside. There's all of these symbols. It's kind of like hieroglyphs in a way. It's communicating. So we don't really know what they mean. It's communicating something. But I mean, to me, the swirl is beautiful because there's got such a flow and such a sort of an eternity. It's sort of got the sense of eternity to it, when you follow the swirls all around and keep following them. I find there's something very, very peaceful about it. It's also sort of evocative, both to me, of sort of water and of just sort of the movement of energy. So I know there's been some fantastic, if anybody's interested in Newgrange, there's an awful lot of work that's been done on Newgrange. There's one article that I wrote many years ago on it. It's on my website. If you want to go into the media, you'll see the article on Newgrange. But there are plenty of books out there if anybody's interested, and some of them get really, really into the mathematics and the architecture of it as well. So I would say to check that out if you're interested in learning more about it.
And we can put in the show notes for this episode, we can put some links that people can go and do some research and find out now that they know these places exist. And you were saying, Karen, before we started talking, you were saying that you might be able to explain to the listeners how they can create their own thin place.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that to following on from like the beehive huts from the monks, from the monasteries and that we can create that sacred space for ourselves within our own home or within, any designated space, basically. You can create, they often say the power is greater in the corner. And so, you can create this space where it's where you go each day to pray or to meditate or to do healing or to do your devotional practices. And you could, if you want, to sort of decorate that with your own sort of symbols or fabrics or candles or incense or whatnot, so that the minute you sit in this space, it evokes a sense of the sacred. And so from sitting in this place yourself for your own meditation or devotion or prayer or healing, over time, because you're evoking the energy and you're sitting in the energy of the spirit, you in turn imbue this place with this power. And so it's the same idea as the sort of the monasteries of the centuries of prayer, that you can, even the Buddhists do this, will sit on their same cushion in the same place. And over time, you get, if you walk into a church even, you just kind of can feel the sense of the sacred because people have gathered for devotion. Right? I do feel that you can create, even if it's within a corner of your house or a particular tree or somewhere that just feels right for you, feels comfortable for you. you can really kind of create the environment that will yield a thin place there. Now you can do that by, say, picking the same corner where they say the power can be stronger within a corner because it's focused, adding sort of fabrics or cushions or candles or incense or symbols or any of these sorts of things, so that when you sit in this space, you immediately yourself feel a sense of the sacred. And so that will help you really to attune to the energy of the unseen world, and to start to bring your own energy to bear on that place. But also through your devotion, you're inviting the energy of the one, of the source of God, into that place as well. And so that over time, this place in itself will become a thin place, where as soon as you sit down into it, you will feel the presence of God.
Eye-Opening Moments podcasts are real-life stories of adversity, encounters, and perspectives. They are moments that can lift your spirits, give you some food for thought, or move you. For the introspective mind that likes to reflect, discover, and find solutions or meaning in a complex life, listen to Eye-Opening Moments podcasts.
Oh, that sounds so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's really wonderful. And Karen, is there still, or are there still places in Ireland that you haven't yet seen that you would love to go to in these beautiful thin places, or have you seen all that you need to see?
No, hundreds still to see. They're everywhere. I would love it would be fantastic just to go wandering about in sort of a random zigzag pattern all over Ireland. The thing about it is, I spent a lot of time in New York, and, in most cultures, there'd be sort of a t-shirt stand, and it would be on Google, and you'd be able to MapQuest your way to it. You know what I mean? A lot of these places, you sort of need to know the locals. The locals know where they are. So you can't just sort of go Google map your way around Ireland to find these places. A lot of them you will and that's part of the mystery, I feel, and the magic of these places. And that you have to just sort of wander and happen upon them. And I feel the exploration of it, to me, is part of the magic.
I think that's lovely. And I also think the less footfall, the less energy that's been bought by many, many visitors, the more sacred that space still is.
Definitely feels that way. And that's why I was saying the difference I feel when I go into Newgrange versus going into Douth. Because nobody bothers really with Douth. It's so undisturbed. It feels so powerful. And that's what I love about it. And that's the thing about Owen Nagat. I mean, it's a hole in the field. Because these places are largely undisturbed, that's where, they're everywhere. They're anywhere. There's a bunch of them in the north side of Dublin. Do you know what I mean? In the middle of the city. So, but the locals will know where they are. And as you say, the less disturbance there's been, the more you feel the voice of the ancestors.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, especially today of all days. It's just absolutely fascinating.
Good, I'm glad. Yeah, it's one of my favorite subjects, I have to say.
So, Karen, are you doing any more talks, or have you got any classes coming up on Celtic myth or Celtic mythology that people may be able to come along to?
Yeah, I have one. I'm really excited. This is the first time I'm going to be teaching it. I'm teaching a course on Celtic myth, magic, and mythology. I'm going to be teaching it at the Montclair Psychic School. It's in the Eastern time zones in New Jersey. That starts on the 4th of May. Goes on for 6 weeks, so I'm really looking forward to that. And and I'm working on some other courses on that. It's just, the whole subject just really fascinates me, and it's a wonderful way for me to be able to sort of incorporate my own mediumship practice, my own mediumship teaching, and bring it into the very ancient ways from Ireland, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. So I'm really excited about teaching that course, and hopefully anybody else who's interested in that type of thing will come along. We'll be working with all sorts of great ways in the old traditions, and we'll also be working with ways to contemporize that to make it all useful. Things like divination and healing and trance and prayer and devotion, all of these sorts of things we'll be working with in ways that you can take the ancient traditions and incorporate them into your life today.
That sounds absolutely brilliant. So where do people find out about that? Where do they go?
Well, you can go to my website, which is karenfrancesmedium.com, and you'll be able to see the whole course there as well. And then that'll forward you on to booking with Montclair. karenfrancesmedium.com. So hopefully you'll have that. And also I've done quite a lot of talks on this too that are on YouTube. If anyone wants to go to my YouTube channel, we've done a few talks on Newgrange, on Bridget, on the Owen the Gat. So you can find those old, much longer, on those, if anyone's interested in listening to those for a little bit more.
So what is your YouTube channel called, Karen?
It's just called Karen Frances Medium. So if you just search for Karen Frances, there's also a link to it on my website as well. So
fantastic. We'll definitely go over there, everybody that's listening, because those talks are just fascinating. Your course that you've just mentioned there, Karen, that sounds absolutely fantastic. What about people for this side of the Atlantic? Have you got any plans for teaching the same sort of topic?
Yeah. I'm hoping that starting on the 26th of September, possibly, for 6 Mondays in a row for the 6-week course, to be able to teach that on a British-Irish time zone friendly time, so probably a Monday evening. So that's the goal at the moment. So I'm really hoping we can do that. So we would be able to teach Celtic myth, magic and mysticism for 6 weeks. They're starting 26th of September is the goal. And we're incorporating, as I said, the same thing, incorporating a lot of the ancient ways, a lot of those ancient tools and techniques, of divination, of healing, of mysticism, of trance, and being able to contemporize them so that they're useful also and things that you can use today in our contemporary world. So if anybody is interested in joining it then later in the year for really October, you could just drop us an email. We'll put you on a wait list and let you know when we have the date solidified. So you could just email me at karenfrancesmedium at gmail.com. That's Frances with an E, karenfrancesmedium at gmail.com.
Please do that, folks, because then Karen will be able to contact you the minute she's got her dates ironed out, because I know that you're doing a PhD at the moment. So I know you're an incredibly busy lady. So once you get your diary and your own schedule sorted, then you'll be able to let everybody know. So if you are interested, now's your chance. Email Karen and let her know.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, really looking forward to it. It's going to be great fun.
So I just want to say thank you so much, Karen, for coming in. And I want to wish you and all our listeners a very happy St. Patrick's Day.
To you too, Anne. Bannock Lefela Padraig. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. As mentioned, there are show notes for this episode which contain a full transcript, plus all the links and URLs mentioned. So to pick that up, please go to my website, anntheato.com, ANNTHEATO.com. I'm actually travelling to Ireland myself in April, as I'm teaching a beautiful 2-day seminar in Dublin called The Extraordinary Medium on Saturday 9th and Sunday 10th of April, where I have the honour of teaching alongside fabulous tutor and spiritual medium Susan Hughes. We will be exploring the altered states of consciousness, discovering how you can elevate your mediumship from ordinary to extraordinary. So please do come along and join Susan and myself. We will be teaching at the Maldron Hotel, which is in Newlands Cross, Clondalkin, Dublin 22. And if you'd like to join Susan and myself, please do email Susan for details, and you can find her at diademsangellight@gmail.com. DIADEMSANGELLIGHT@gmail.com. For now, I want to say thank you very much for listening. Have a wonderful couple of weeks, and I will be back on the 24th of March with a very special podcast episode for you. Thursday, 24th of March 2022 is an incredibly poignant day for me. I have taken everything out of my diary and I've cleared a day for myself because I really feel This particular day needs to be celebrated in some way, and certainly it's an occasion to be marked with as much positivity as I can possibly muster. And I will explain why it's so poignant for me next time. But for now, please know that I'm creating this episode in honour of my incredible brother Paul, who passed away last year, and it's an episode I'm creating with my very special guest, Matt Hopwood. And Matt will be talking about how the very special work he does out there in the world is building compassion and understanding amongst individuals across communities and nations. It's an episode on love. There may be tears, but Matt will allow you to learn more about the thing that makes each of our lives unique, our experience and understanding of love. Until then, my name is Ann Théato, and thank you for listening to Psychic Matters.